Welcome to the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters podcast. I'm your host, W.J. Sheehan. Hello, everybody, and once again, welcome to this, our show of shows. I am your host, W.J. Sheehan, author of the series Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters. And we are so glad that you joined us today. I have some very good news today as I begin the rundown of today's podcast. Many of you have been prodding me to record my volumes in audio form, and I have been listening to you. I am happy to announce that Volume 6 is now available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon, with 5 following in suit at any moment. And I will be continuing with the entire series as time permits. Of course, all of the books are available in paperback and ebook as I speak, so do purchase one and help support what we are doing. In today's Cryptids and the News and History segment, if you have a fear of insects, especially monstrous moths with fangs and glowing eyes, you better tune out now. Kevin is going to dissect the Mothman. And in part 2, have you ever imagined that you saw a face in the bark of a tree or while frying some eggs in a pan? Then this account is going to rattle your cage like none other. And finally, in our listener mail segment, we will once again be addressing and answering those queries which have been sent in by our listeners, such as yourself. So don't be shy. Contact us using our contact link on our webpage, BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com. But before I hand the ball off to my brother Kevin, a big shout out to a friend of the podcast, Carl Wiesner, and his lovely wife, Carol. Carl is turning 90 in August. And remember, Carl, he that has begun a good work in you will finish it. So may God bless you with health, a sound mind, and a sound body for years to come. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Good. I'm revved up for this show today. There's a lot of good material here, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's. I think it's going to be a fun one. You know, we're going to talk about creepy Mothman, and Mothman's kind of cool to me because, you know, the largest concentration of sightings occurred over a very short period of time in a relatively small place. So it's kind of different than some of the other cryptids we talk about.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and, you know, one has to wonder if this thing is real or was real, and the fact that it was seen in a very small area, what may have brought it on in that location?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're going to get there.
Okay. Go ahead, brother. Let's hear what you got to bring to us today.
All right. So dateline for the Mothman story goes back to November 12th, 1966. And it starts out a little creepy. We have 5 men who were digging a grave at a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia. Exactly.
Of course, it's got to start out with grave diggers, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Can't
boy.
make this stuff up.
Okay.
And these 5 grave diggers claim to have seen a man-like figure fly low from the trees over their heads.
Oh my God!
To be out there in rural West Virginia digging a grave and see a man-like creature swoop over your head with wings.
And were they holding a gas lantern under the midnight moon?
Maybe. There might have been a jack-o'-lantern there, too.
Oh my goodness! Go ahead, bro.
Okay. And so let's talk about where Clendenin, West Virginia is first. So it's toward the northern side of West Virginia. And as the crow flies, or maybe in this case, as the moth flies for this story, it's about 50 miles southeast of a little town called Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And I'm mentioning Point Pleasant because it's where most of the sightings of Mothman occurred. So, we had this one sighting in Clendenin and then a lot of sightings in a town of Point Pleasant, about 50 miles away. So Point Pleasant, West Virginia is right on the border of West Virginia and Ohio on the banks of the Ohio River. And the Ohio River actually forms the border between the U.S. state of West Virginia and the U.S. state of Ohio. And basically, right after the grave diggers saw this creature, a pair of couples were together, and they reported seeing the Mothman creature while they were in their car. And this story shows up as a written account in the Point Pleasant Register in Point Pleasant, West Virginia on November 16th, 1966. And the headline is, "Couple see man-sized bird, ... creature, ... something."
Wow.
So I'll read the story to you.
Okay.
So, it was a bird or something. It definitely wasn't a flying saucer. Two Point Pleasant couples said today they encountered a man-sized bird-like creature in the TNT area about midnight last night. Sheriff's deputies and city police went to the scene about 2 o'clock this morning, but were unable to spot anything. But the two young men telling their story this morning were dead serious and asserted to us that they had not been drinking. Steve Millett and Roger Scarberry described the thing as being about 6 or 7 feet tall, having a wingspan of 10 feet, and red eyes about 2 inches in diameter each and about 6 inches apart. Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, what a creepy set of circumstances. Interesting, too, as you go on, they're trying to equate drinking to hallucinating.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I've never had a six-pack and then saw Mothman. But go ahead, bro.
Maybe Mothra if I was watching a Godzilla movie. Okay, so back to the story. Millett states, "It was like a man with wings. It wasn't like anything you'd see on TV or in a monster movie." The men and their wives were in Scarberry's car between 11:30 p.m. and midnight when they spotted the creature near the old power plant adjacent to the old National Guard Armory buildings. The creature was seen standing on 3 occasions and was described as being extremely fast. It flew about 100 miles an hour, but it was quite a clumsy runner while it was on the ground. Deputy Millard Halstead said he had seen dust in the vicinity of a coal field, but it could have been caused by the bird, he said. "I'm a hard guy to scare," Scarberry said, "but last night I was for getting out of there. They did just that, but the thing followed them. They said it was hovering over the car, apparently gliding, until they reached the National Guard Armory on Route 62. We went downtown, turned around, and went back, and there it was again," Millett said. "It seemed to be waiting on us." He said the light gray-like creature then scurried through a field. It also had flown across the top of the car. "It apparently is afraid of light," Millett reasoned, "and maybe it thought I was scaring it off." The young men said they saw the creature's eyes, which glowed red, only when their lights shined on it, and it seemed to want to get away from the lights. They said it looked like a man with wings, but that the head was not an outstanding characteristic. Both were slightly pale and tired from lack of sleep during the night following their harrowing experience. They speculated that the thing was living in the vacant power plant, possibly in one of the huge boilers. They said, "There are pigeons in all the other buildings," Millett said, "but not in that one. If I had seen it while by myself, I wouldn't have said anything, Scarberry commented, but there were 4 of us that saw it at the same time. They said it didn't resemble a bat in any way, but maybe what you would visualize as an angel. The last time they saw it was at the gate of the C.C. Lewis farm on Route 62. They heard a sound like wings flapping, and they said the bird rose straight up like a helicopter. This doesn't have an explanation to it, Millette said. It was an animal, but nothing like I've seen before. Are they going back to look for the creature? Yes, Millette said, this afternoon and again tonight. However, Scarberry said, today, yes, but tonight, I don't know.
Holy smoke. You know, they talk, Kev, about this creature gliding over the car. And, of course, we don't have any more information than that short phrase that you read. But you and I both know, in the realm of like raptors or aircraft, you have to have some kind of lift to maintain flight. You know, some type of airflow. Now, we don't know how long this thing was gliding over the car, but it kind of reeks of something abnormal, that there would be no flapping involved to maintain a glide, if you will, above the vehicle. Also, when
I don't know if they're talking about when they were moving though, or when they were parked. If it glided across them. I don't know. I don't know if it was hovering right over them or gliding by.
Right. The other thing,
I see what you mean.
Yeah, the other thing too is, a 6 or a 7 foot human style body or any type of body has to have some weight to it. And in the natural realm, I'm not convinced a 10-foot set of wings could keep this thing aloft. No, you're exactly right. I mean, if it was truly like man-like, because that's the thing with, you mentioned raptors, and that those birds are extremely light. Their body has a relatively big proportion to the wings, to the wingspan. Right.
But the bodies themselves are super light. Their bones are super light. They're built to fly.
Right. Now, I've had a bird in my hand. Most of the body that you see is feathers.
Exactly.
And then even their bones, I believe, are hollow.
Exactly.
So they were created in every way, shape, or form to be light and aerodynamic.
Yep. No doubt about it.
That's why
the other thing that's kind of interesting, right? Everyone describes this as the Mothman, but then in this account they talk about the fact that it seemed to move away from the light, which, of course, a moth, as we know, when you put on the porch light at night outside, it tends to attract the moths. So I thought that's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. Good point. Well taken. Yeah. It just the whole thing to me reeks of the demonic. I think this thing is some type of bizarre demon that was brought into this world by something going on in that area at that point in time. And, of course, we'll never know. Are there any accounts of this thing coming forward from that date that you saw, or it was really a one-trick pony?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So let's look at a couple of those. So one of the stories that's worth mentioning, it's the same account from the couples, but it showed up in the on UPI, United Press International, and the headline's interesting. So, it came out of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, but the big headline was "Red-Eyed Creature Reported in West Virginia." And it basically tells a shorter version of the same story with the same quotes from the prior story. But I think it's interesting where they said red-eyed creature, and they didn't even mention the fact that it was flying overhead with 10-foot wings.
Yeah.
Kind of odd.
Yeah, it is odd.
Red-eyed creature. I don't know. Maybe it's just somebody that stayed out a little too late the night before.
Really red-eyed creature.
I guess, I won't be able to make it as a headline person. So the Mothman was around in 1966 and 1967, generally speaking, in this area, West Virginia. And the reports out there usually state that at least 100 people saw and reported on Mothman, and that many more were afraid to report their sightings or did not come forward for whatever reason.
Sure, it's always.
And I think that, we always talk about that. Like, if you saw a big hairy man or a Mothman, what would you do? Would you tell anyone? Would you be afraid they'd think you're crazy? Would you tell your close friend or family, but no one else, etc.?
Yeah. And, it's the same drill. If 10 people saw this thing, probably 10,000 people saw this thing.
Right. And then getting to your, where you're going a little bit with the potential for this being some type of evil that was conjured up, you can't really talk about Mothman without talking about the December 15th, 1967 collapse of the Silver Star Bridge in that same area of West Virginia. Mm-hmm. And this bridge collapsed, and it was an absolute catastrophic event in this area of the country, and it led to the death of 46 people. So basically, you had this bridge, and it was loaded up during rush hour, and it collapsed and went into the river. And a lot of folks, or several folks, reported that they saw a Mothman just prior to the bridge collapsing.
Wow.
So I'm not saying that the two are connected, but I would be remiss if I'm here reporting on what happened with Mothman and the sightings if I didn't talk about the collapse of the Silver Bridge.
Well, I'll tell you what. In biblical narrative, when angels appeared, on many occasions, they were a precursor to destruction. So I'm not giving any credit to the demonic realm, but don't think for 2 seconds that the same thing can't be allowed to happen with demonic entities prevailing over mankind in a bad way. It's almost like a penalty shot, well, if you do this, this will happen. And if you don't do this, this will happen. And we see that again and again and again, like I said, in the biblical narrative, Who knows what was going on there?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that. So in the account, right, in the written account that appeared in the Point Pleasant Register, the one gentleman said that it looked like an angel. Mm-hmm. It looked, he didn't say that he'd seen an angel, but he was saying that it looked as what he might think an angel would look like. And I want to ask you about that because you were immediately talking about it like it was, a conjured spirit rather than an angel. So I just wanted to get to that a little bit with you.
Yeah, now, Kev, and many of our listeners know from hearing me interviewed, I have had numerous angelic encounters. And whether people believe that or not is no concern of mine whatsoever. Angels can appear in a couple of forms. They can appear as men, and they can appear as beings such as we see in a lot of the old artwork. These winged, glowing, white, ethereal creatures with wings attached to the back. But to me, the wings aren't used for flying. They're almost put there by the Creator as this magnificent part of their being to look upon and gaze upon. They're fantastically created creatures. On the flip side of that, a demon can appear in many forms also. And some of them, in their own evil way, are magnificently fearful to look upon. They are horrifically ugly and frightening. And I believe they, too, can appear with a pair of wings that may not necessarily be for flying as we know it.
Okay. Okay, and I mean, usually when folks talk about seeing angels and that, they have some kind of like pleasant aura around them, right, or a glowing aura, and we don't have that in this account. We have them, folks are frightened. You hear the one gentleman say, "Hey, I'll go back now during the daytime, but I don't think I'm going back tonight to see this thing again."
Yeah, I'm not going back at all. You can't fight spirit.
No, I haven't seen anything like that, but the thought of it terrifies me.
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. I've been in the presence of good angels, and they will scare you to death. And if again, looking at the biblical narrative, whenever these things appeared to humans to give them a message or to give them some direction, the first thing they said is, don't be afraid, because they know that just stepping into your realm and appearing before you, you're going to be drop dead scared, and you may miss the message by running out of your house.
Yeah, makes sense. So we have one more sighting. Now, this is interesting. It's a modern day sighting.
Okay.
So this one was reported on by Fallon Pearson on November 21st, 2016, again in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And this is interesting. So folks can see this online if they Google it. But the man didn't give his name, but he reported seeing Mothman while he was out hunting in Mason County. And he took some pictures of it. So she showed several pictures, and he said... I'm sorry, I said he was hunting. He wasn't hunting. He was driving along State Route 2 and saw something jump from tree to tree across the road. And he pulled over and took some pictures. And he has these pictures online, and they look like a man, like it looks like a man with wings about 10 feet long and kind of long, narrow, pointy wings, like from a raptor, for example, or maybe like an angel's wings. And he has like 2 or 3 different pictures from different angles, like you would take as something flew across in front of you. And they're pretty interesting, and of course there's experts that comment on the story, and other regular people that comment on the story too, that say, hey, it's, of course it could be fake, but can't really tell. It's they look like photographs of a man flying across the road with wings.
Yeah, and
I thought that's pretty interesting.
Before we had photographs, you had nothing but to rely on a man's good word. When he or she said, this is what happened and this is what I saw. Today, everything's, battled with, it's CG or this. It's amazing how the technology that's supposed to help us hinders us when we're talking about things like this in Bigfoot.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
But pretty cool. So that's Mothman. He primarily around this place, Point Pleasant, from November 12th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967. So about 13 months.
Wow.
So pretty interesting to have, over 100 reported sightings of this same creature, but only over a period of 13 months all around this relatively small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Incredible. And I have an account, which I'm sure we'll get into down the road a piece, of what a guy described as a harpy. I don't know if you remember that fantastic show, I think it was Jason and the Argonauts.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that? Do you remember when they were battling those harpies that were coming down over the table to steal the blind man's food or something like that?
Yes. I couldn't remember the name until now you're explaining it.
Yeah, and this is what this guy was describing, and we'll get into that down the road, but that sounds a lot like what this other man took a couple of shots of with his camera. But that stuff is creepy. Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's a creepy story, and again, I like it because it occurred in such a small place over such a short period of time.
Wow, this is crazy. Well, so let's get into my account. As And I'm going to start basically with this fella's name. His name was Lance Jurgensen. And in August of 2014, he was fly fishing near Kennison Mountain in West Virginia. Now, you and I, once again, Kev, I knew nothing about what you were going to say or the location. All I knew was you were going to talk about Mothman. But here, this guy is in West Virginia fly fishing.
Oh, that's cool.
And here is what Lance had to say about his very strange and frightening encounter. As I told you, Bill, I have a number of favorite haunts, if you will, that I like to get away to and do a little fishing, most of which I access by using my quad, having trailed it in near to where I am going. I like seclusion, and in my life, this is how I achieve it whenever I have some downtime. All I can say is that it works for me, and as the saying goes, different strokes for different folks. On August 12, 2014, I had worked in as close as I could get to my destination, which was the area of Charles Creek, Cranberry River, and the Cranberry Glades. This is a pristine wilderness location, and there are quite a few nice fish in here for the taking. It was 8 o'clock in the morning when I started to fish, working my way up the bank of Charles Creek and walking northward toward the glades. I should tell you that there is no shortage of wildlife in here, including deer, black bear, and every kind of ground critter that you can imagine. I say this because as you settle into the stillness of the surrounds, the forest gradually comes alive around you. When I am fishing here, it's not uncommon to hear the snap of a twig or the crunching of the leaves. My eyes are always moving in response to whatever I hear, but my main focus is on the water's surface. I was getting into some really fine fish, approaching the fork by Cranberry Glades, when I heard a little grunt across the creek. I say this because at that moment my mind said there was a black bear foraging around. Typically, a bear doesn't want anything to do with humans, and they will move off quickly once they are aware of you or have caught your scent. On this day, I was downwind from this critter. If it was a bear, it wouldn't have gotten wind of me from where I was positioned. I also couldn't see it, so it couldn't see me either. I kept fishing, being mindful of what I had heard. After about another 15 minutes or so, I started to hear some movement upstream from me, maybe about 50 yards away. Along the opposite bank of the creek, there was what I will describe as a barrier that was formed by some dense brush and bramble bushes. Within this wall, which was backed by many much larger trees, there were occasionally small tunnels that were formed simply by the growth pattern of the bushes. Think of them as being small windows where you could see into the brush for maybe a couple of feet or so. From my perspective, everything looked very uniform as I was gazing across the creek in response to the grunt which I heard, with the exception of one small dark patch within the bramble. The only way I can explain this is to say that the coloration of everything in front of me and beyond had certain shades and hues. These colors were unbroken as far as the foliage was concerned, and yet here was this singular, very dark patch plugged into the bramble's edge some 75 feet or so away. For whatever reason, my eyes couldn't shake looking at this dark area. The more that I looked at it, the more that I started to see what I believed was a face. And yet, there was absolutely no movement whatsoever. I am sure that you have heard of people saying that they saw the face of Jesus when frying an egg in a pan, or someone saying they saw a face in a mirror and thought it was a ghost, only to find out that the back of the mirror was peeling or the angle of the reflection made it seem as such. This was exactly what I was seeing and believing. In my mind, I was looking at a large black or dark brown face with big black eyes and a grin of white teeth. To make things even more interesting, the face which I believed I was looking at was only maybe 2 feet from the ground. So this was either a very short creature with an enormous head, or it was lying on the ground peering at me through the bushes. This visage had completely consumed my attention. At some point, I felt that I had actually locked eyes with a living being, and a cold chill permeated my very soul. I mean that I actually shook violently from head to toe for a few seconds. All I can say is that in a moment's time, I went from feeling total bliss and tranquility to being in a state of absolute fear and dread. Now, just behind where I believed I was seeing this black face, there was a very large old tree that was of substantial diameter. It had fallen and was leaning against a couple of other trees. This fallen tree was perhaps 2 feet wide and was leaning completely across and behind the bushes where the face was, beginning from ground level and angling upward maybe 12 feet to where it met the other tree where it had come to rest. I can't say why I didn't back out of there after this cold chill had consumed me, but I continued to creep ever closer to what I was looking at. I was convinced that I was looking eye to eye with a living creature, but I hadn't seen so much as a twitch or a blink of what I believed were a pair of eyes. I was now within about 40 feet of this thing when I realized that I was now seeing hair and wrinkles. I almost lost my breath as this realization hit me. It was like a sudden shockwave that froze me in my tracks with a sensation of what I would describe as dread or doom. I know that these are strong words, but in that moment, I felt I had crossed a line to where I was now in fear of my very life. That's the only way which I can describe it to you. It was at that very moment that a gigantic beast launched upward and had now revealed itself fully, standing only 40 feet away from me. It let out a deep and foreboding growl, and I don't know how I stayed on my feet at the sight of it. I was standing across a shallow creek 40 feet away from an enormous growling Bigfoot. It didn't stand up gradually, but rather leapt out of the bush in an instant to a standing position. As I stood there trembling, the beast started to contort its head, rolling it around in a circular motion, like it was trying to loosen up as a weightlifter would at the gym. No sooner had it finished doing this movement than did it force its upper body forward, flexed its arms, and let out a loud, deep, and prolonged growl. I could feel the sound waves passing through me across the creek. When the growl ended, it let out a snort, turned, and leaped over the downed tree, disappearing into the woods. Of course, I now had affirmation that I was looking at a living being the entire time. The Bigfoot had to be lying on its belly, watching me the whole time through the bushes. I don't know what it was thinking of doing. Perhaps it was just inquisitive of my own presence. The thought had occurred to me after the fact that it may have been pissed off at me for staring at it for such a long time, and then moving a little too close for comfort. It reminded me very much of the rabbits which I come across in my yard, eating weeds and grass. They will stay perfectly still as though I don't see them until I am almost on top of them before they jump. This is the same type of behavior that to me this Bigfoot was exhibiting until I had come a little bit too close and it felt its cover had been blown. When the creature stood up, it had to have been at the very least 9 feet tall, and I could tell that it was a male for obvious reasons. The hair was dark brown. It was definitely hair, not fur like that of a black bear. I don't want to say that the body was sparsely covered, but there was definitely areas of the body where the skin could be seen, which appeared to be somewhat gray in coloration. It opened its mouth very wide when it growled in the same fashion that I have seen chimpanzees do. Having said that, I make no bones about it that this is not a gorilla, and it is definitely not a man. In fact, the only human attribute that Bigfoot has, in my opinion, is that they stand on 2 legs and can walk. To me, they are an unknown species that stand alone unto themselves in nature, in the same way that a moose is not an elk and an elk is not a deer. A Bigfoot is quite simply a Bigfoot and nothing else. The creature had a very broad nose which consumed a large section of its face. It had somewhat loose and scraggly hair above and below the mouth, as well as coming in from the sides. Its face was deeply furrowed with dark wrinkles in its skin. As it flexed its upper torso, it had fists clenched, and they were the size of small pumpkins. The body was overall very broad from waist to shoulders, and I would have to say it was somewhere between 4 and 5 feet in width. I could tell you right now, without any reservations whatsoever, that I could have died that day and would have never been found. The sheer strength and power exhibited by this beast was overwhelming in every sense of the word. With one swipe of its hand, I am convinced it could have broken me in 2 pieces and ended my life right then and there. Having had this experience for myself, I have no comprehension whatsoever how anybody could be left saying that these things are part human in any way, shape, or form. This, to me, would be like saying a moose was part human if they walked on 2 legs. This thing was an animal, and more aptly, a monster. I felt as though I had encountered the Wolfman or Frankenstein. I will tell you and your readers this as well. There was an overwhelming sense of evil coming out of this encounter, and I have no idea how I escaped death, other than that my guardian angel was with me and scared off the beast.
Whoa.
I mean,
that's serious encounter. I can't imagine.
And prolonged. This guy was eyeballing this thing, wondering if he was in fact seeing something in these bushes for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, and it's a very detail-oriented person. You can tell with the descriptions, and then you and I know, Bill, as fly fishermen, you're there fishing and you're just concentrating on the surface of the water and really have no idea what's going on around you often. I mean, it's interesting. Like I was out in the surf fishing here in North Carolina a couple of weekends ago, and it was towards sunset, but the sun was still well up, and it was after the 4th of July weekend, that following weekend. So there were still a lot of people out and about on vacation. And I was there with my feet in the surf, fishing along. The sun's going down, and it was interesting. I caught a couple of fish, and then I turned around when the sun went down, and there was literally no one on the beach as far as I could see. But I didn't notice that everybody had left, because I was concentrating on the surface of the water, looking for the bait fish going by, looking at the birds flying over, and trying to see where the next fish would bite.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's you get that same feel from this gentleman, that he's there in the stream, and just so focused on the surface of the water, and then something catches his eye, even in a slight way, when he's hearing this grunt, which would be alarming in itself. Super interesting. And then you wonder if you start to imagine something like he's describing. Am I really seeing something in that patch, or am I imagining it?
Well, as it turns out, he was really seeing something, and
he definitely was really seeing it.
It really was seeing him as well.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting too that it was lying down. In a lot of these accounts, you have folks like they think they see something and then they're looking around. I don't recall them looking down, to see a Bigfoot lying on the ground. You would think more that it's like ducked behind a tree or something like that. But that could contribute to its stealthiness when you think about the fact that maybe these things are lying down in the bramble when you're looking for them. That would be impossible to find.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. In the military, what do they teach snipers to do? Crawl.
Yeah, exactly. They have the ghillie suit on, and they're laying down and crawling along in the weeds and brush.
And they also practice being observed while they're trying to approach a position in a ghillie suit to see if they can be spotted out.
Yeah. I mentioned that on one of our previous podcasts where, I think that the Bigfoot is just a very stealthy creature. And, it has the ability and instinct to hide and almost disappear. I mean, of course you have the accounts where people say they literally disappeared. But getting back to the sniper example, if you were watching a sniper, they can literally disappear. But, of course, they're not literally disappearing. they're camouflage.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And the size of this thing, again, he's talking 9
immense.
feet. Just
And 4 to 5 feet wide.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
You know, I've had a number of people in their accounts who live in like farm type communities. If I've had one, I've had 10 that describe as a Bigfoot as being the size of a barn door.
Yeah, this sounds like a barn door.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and a barn door, a half of a swinging barn door is I don't know, we talking 4x8, like a sheet of plywood, or it's got to
Exactly, maybe even a little bigger.
Yeah, it's got to be a big piece of timber or planks nailed together to form the door. But you don't just say, you know, like I look like a barn door. They may say I have a head that's made of wood. But
like a barn door.
Like a barn door. But I don't look like a barn door.
Or maybe he listens about as well as a barn door.
Oh, my goodness. Well, that is...
You know, I also thought some of his descriptions were pretty cool. Like he says, you know, it gets to where people often say to someone who has an account of seeing something, they say, oh, maybe it was a bear. You know, maybe you're mistaken.
Yeah.
And in this case, you know, he says something like, just like a moose is not an elk and an elk is not a deer. You know, you're not going to mistake one of those for the other when you're the one reporting on seeing it.
Yeah, and, you know, he drips with sarcasm, which is right in my wheelhouse, when he says that, you know, you wouldn't describe an elk as being part human if you saw it stand on 2 feet.
Exactly.
It's just stupid, you know. Oh, it's got to be part human. Look, it has a nose, it has 2 eyes, it has 2 ears, and it's on 2 legs, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's it, you know, if you saw me swimming in the pool, am I a fish? You know what I mean? It's just bizarre.
You could be a barn door floating in the
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, and you know, I was fly fishing in the Connecticut River one day, and anybody who fishes rivers knows that the brush gets really thick by the edges of the river because it's being fed by water continually. And in the Connecticut, there's a couple of spots where you could duck into the river, but once you're in there walking around and casting the fly, you can't see a foot inside of what's next to you on the left and right. And I heard a little crunch one day when I was in there, and my eyes are always drawn to the sound. And I had a rainbow laying on the limited amount of grass that was by this brush at one point, maybe like 1.5 feet of grass. I had this rainbow laying there. I hear this noise, and I turn my head, and a raccoon sticks its head out of the bushes, looks left and right, and ducks back in.
Oh, he was going to grab your rainbow trout?
Well, it was like he must have smelled it and stuck his head out to see where it was.
Yeah.
He ducked back in, and the rainbow was about 20 feet away from where it had emerged. Maybe 60 seconds later, this little rascal pops out exactly where the rainbow was, snatches it, and ducks back into the bushes with my fish. It was excellent to see, you know.
He said, that's why we wear a mask, you know.
You know, and see, people who aren't out there doing things, you just can't appreciate what I just told you.
Yeah.
But it all started with a little sound that was out of the ordinary, and then by me continuing to focus on the sound and what may come of it while I was fishing at the same time.
Yep.
Very
absolutely.
interesting. Very interesting, Kev.
Cool account, though, and definitely, boy, that's terrifying. Now, when you're at the edge of a shallow stream, and this thing, you know, 9 or 10 feet tall and 4 or 5 feet wide, is right across the stream from you, like, holy cow.
Yeah, and easily, this thing that he described, the way it leapt up, it could have launched across that creek and clobbered him.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
So he was a lucky man that day.
Yeah, as he said. Boy.
Wow, fantastic story, fantastic information brought forth on the Mothman. And now, where are we heading, Kev?
Yeah, we're going to part 3. We're going to do some viewer mail, and we have some good ones this week. Thanks again to everybody who's sending in the email to our website, BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com. We really appreciate it. And this one comes from Northern Canada, from Ted, one of the areas where we often hear of the hairy man being sighted. And Ted writes, I have spent the better part of my life as a guide in the North Woods. I've heard the howls on more occasions than I can count, and I can attest that they belong to no known species in these parts. I've also witnessed numerous violent tree-shaking episodes, all of which occurred at some distance from where I was positioned. My personal assessment is that these creatures are real, and yet in over 40 years I have yet to see even one. Keep up the good work. Your investigative prowess is invaluable. Well, thanks, Ted.
Fantastic.
I mean, that's pretty cool. A guide from the North Woods of Canada.
Yeah, I mean, come on. These people, this is what they do for a living, for God's sake. They're in the woods probably every day of the year. And who better than to come forward and make a statement about what he sees and hears on a somewhat regular basis?
Exactly. And again, he's saying, hey, I've never seen one. But when you look at the account that you read today, Bill, it's reasonable that you haven't seen one. I mean, it's that giant creature was very close to this very observant gentleman that was fly fishing, and he really almost didn't see him.
Right.
He thought he was imagining it until he heard the noise, and of course until the creature leapt up from its hiding spot.
Right, and you see, the fly fisherman wouldn't give up on the fact that he was becoming increasingly convinced that he was looking at something. And he didn't give up on it. He kept focusing until finally he realized, I see wrinkles. What did he say? I see wrinkles and I saw skin? Something like that.
Yeah.
And this guy from the Canadian woods, he easily is able to make the statement, what I was listening to is nothing that I know of in these woods. Now, who better to make that statement? I mean, if I went up there, I would be thinking it was a bear howling or a mountain lion. And he says flat out, no, nothing of the sort.
Yep, or a wolf, etc.
Yeah, who knows?
Cool. Well, thanks, Ted. That's good input, and thank you very much for the email. So we're going to go across the pond, so to speak, to the United Kingdom. And we have an email from Bertrand. And Bertrand writes, I'm really enjoying the two of you and the discussion surrounding the Bigfoot. Has either of you had an encounter of your own? I'm not convinced that I would want to.
Wow. Yeah, well, Bertrand, I'm not convinced I want to either. As a matter of fact, I don't want to. And I don't think Kevin's had a sighting of a Bigfoot. In fact, I know he hasn't, but
I definitely haven't had a sighting. I'm a little closer to the other side of the coin, no, Bill. I think, like, if I was ready for it and, with a few other folks that were extremely well armed.
Emphasis on the armament.
Extremely well armed. Several of us, just in case a gun jammed or something like that.
Exactly.
Or if one of us froze at the side of it, which would be reasonable.
Yeah.
There'd be 3 more to get my back. So I would, I think I would like to see it in the right setting.
Yeah.
But no, I certainly haven't seen one.
Yeah, and I say that, and I've always said, for people that know me and listen to me, I don't mind having an encounter from afar, but like this fly fisherman or the guide in Canada, what was his name, Ted, Kev?
Yep, Ted in northern Canada.
You know, he didn't go there looking to see these violent tree shakings or to hear these howls. He probably had a paid client or was scoping out his next area to bring a paid client. But if something gets to jump on you and you have a sudden and spontaneous encounter, what are you going to do? You experience it and you move on, you know, but I'm not looking to be put in that circumstance.
No, and it's like, hey, there's a good chance if you were that fly fisherman, you could have a heart attack just from that encounter.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
All right, let's go. We're going to continue eastward from the UK, and we're going to go all the way to India, one of the old colonies of the UK.
Wow.
And we have an email that comes in from Anu. And Anu writes, I'm really enjoying what you are putting out. What, if anything, do you know about the Tibetan sightings? And if possible, could you add that to your cryptids agenda?
Wow, what do you say about that, Kev?
Well, you know, we did a Cryptids in the News several weeks back about the Indian Army up in the Tibetan mountains, where they tweeted about some findings of what they reported as Yeti footprints. So we did that a few weeks ago, and I certainly don't think it's the last that you're going to hear us talk about Yeti or any of the other types of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti-like creatures that are reported upon in Asia. So we will continue to add it to the cryptids agenda, Anu, and thank you very much for the email.
Fantastic. You know what's really interesting, Kev, and you know this, the length and breadth of the listening audience is just incredible.
It is incredible.
I mean,
folks, we get the stats from all of you out there that are listening, and I am amazed how far and wide and deep the audience is. So we really appreciate it, and we're working hard to continue to get a quality product out to you folks. But it's interesting. And by the way, a little side shout out. Boy, we have a ton of listeners in the great state of Texas here in the USA, and we got to get some more mail from you folks. We got a couple in the past, but boy, there are a lot of listeners in Texas.
Yeah, big shout out to Texas. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to go from India over to France to Ariana. And Ariana writes, I've been listening to your podcast now for a month, and I've read Volume 3. This discussion is certainly fantastic. But is it reality? I love it just the same, and you guys are the best. Well, thank you, Ariana.
Fantastic, Kev. Well,
what do you think, Bill?
Yeah.
Reality?
Yeah, you know my stance on this. When somebody asks me, is this real? Are these stories true, etc., I always put it right back at them. What do you think? Because if you're asking me, I believe Bigfoot is real. But what does what I have to say have to do with what you think or what you have to say? I have said in my Carl Sagan quote, when I said what he said was, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I followed by saying I thought that threshold had been met and overcome with what we have to date. But other people out there, it's never enough.
Yeah.
It's never enough.
I came across an interesting quote that I didn't report on here in this podcast from a professor that was talking about the Mothman sighting, but it kind of fits this response. So this gentleman, his name is Bill Reeder, professor, and he says, in this day and age, a claim about the Mothman, people would just scoff at it. People are now skewed to not believe anything, even if it's real.
Yeah.
Which I thought is kind of interesting.
That's
right?
very intuitive. Very intuitive. Yeah. And I find that all the time. It's just people, I don't know if it's a localized thing, Kev, like a United States thing, or just the people I'm running into. people are so caught up in weird stuff that I just have no interest in. And
that might just be your neighborhood.
Yeah, it could be my neighborhood. Or my workplace. I mean, the stuff people are talking about and interested in is just like, man, rubbish to me. Just hard to believe. Wow.
All right, we got one more note here. And this one is from California, from Rex. And Rex writes, "The podcast is everything that I have wanted to hear and then some. I haven't purchased any books as yet, as I'm waiting for your audiobooks to come to fruition. I once saw a Bigfoot treed in the northern rainforest. I don't know how it got where it was or what it was doing, but I hightailed it out of there, and that was that. Keep this train running."
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, well, this is your day, because I just announced that Volume 6 is up on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, and 5 will probably be out any day now. They don't tell me until it actually happens, but it was approved, and it's out for, quote, retail, which can take up to 14 days. So any day you're going to see 5 pop up. And as far as the creature treed, I've had 2 or 3 accounts where people have seen these things nest robbing high up in the trees. I also had an account where another fisherman, and I think it was Vermont, saw what turned out to be a young one climbing up and down a pine tree on the opposite bank to where he was standing. It then stopped and looked at him, went lower in the tree to where he couldn't see it, and emerged sitting on the shoulder of Daddy Bigfoot, walking down the bank in the other direction.
Wow.
Yeah, incredible. So these things, they have skills and agility and abilities and strength beyond comprehension. So it's no surprise to me to see one of them in a tree, or swimming, or running, or leaping, or dragging a tree. They just have immense capabilities. Fantastic.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, thank you, Rex, for that email, and I'm glad that you're enjoying the podcast. And folks out there, thank you so much for spending the time with us. And again, keep the emails coming. Send them in at our website, BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com. And then also keep the great reviews coming. We really appreciate all of the positive energy coming in. If you get a chance, we know your time is valuable. Leave us some stars or leave us a written review on your favorite podcast player. And with that, Bill, I think it's a wrap.
Yeah, it is a wrap. And folks, remember, until we meet again, always carry more gun than you think you're going to need. Sleep tight.